Now to the fighting on the ground in Ukraine. Russian airstrikes have hit Lviv, cutting power and water supply to parts of the western Ukrainian city close to the Polish border. Russian forces also struck train stations in the centre and west of the country, according to a railway official. Plumes of smoke could be seen rising above Lviv. The city's mayor said the strike hit 2 power substations. Lviv has been spared the worst of the fighting so far, with only a handful of strikes hitting civilian and military infrastructure. Meanwhile, Russian forces continue to bombard areas in eastern Ukraine. The regional governor of Donetsk says Russian attacks killed at least 21 people there on Tuesday. Russian forces also launched a renewed assault on the Azov steelworks in Mariupol. Some residents were evacuated during a brief ceasefire, but many more are still trapped there.
Safe at last. After weeks under constant attack, these people have escaped the Azovstal steel plant, Ukraine's last stronghold in the besieged city of Mariupol. Many arrive in tears, recounting stories of horror. You can't imagine how scary it is when you sit in the shelter in a wet and damp basement, which is bouncing, shaking. When we were able to go outside, I saw the sun for the second time in 2 months. But while dozens have made it to safety, thousands remain in danger. At the moment, while we are here, Azovstal is being stormed. Mariupol is still under siege and people could not leave today. There are tens of thousands of such people, tens of thousands of women, and the elderly remain in Mariupol. Russian shelling continued through the day in Mariupol. Soon after the evacuation was completed, those who remain are in despair. You wake up in the morning and you cry. You cry in the evening. I don't know where to go at all. I am not alone. Imagine, everything is destroyed. Everything is broken. Where should the people go now? Relatives of the soldiers still fighting in the Azovstal plant held rallies in Kyiv on Tuesday, demanding they be evacuated too. The soldiers are part of the controversial far-right Azov regiment. While Ukrainian authorities promise to continue the operation, they say international intervention will be crucial.
DW correspondent Emmanuelle Chaze is standing by for us in Lviv. Emma, airstrikes yesterday hit Lviv, where you are, and some other targets in the centre and west of Ukraine. Tell us more.
Exactly, Rebecca. There was a targeted airstrike here on Lviv and elsewhere in western Ukraine. There was a press conference this morning of Lviv's mayor and of the head of the military force, which confirmed that 2 missiles were coming, cruise missiles coming from the Caspian Sea, hit Lviv, hit a railway infrastructure, and also damaged the chain supply nearby this railway infrastructure, including humanitarian supplies coming from Ukraine's western allies. There were power shortages here in Lviv last night. They are being restored this morning. There's still 600 houses without electricity. There's water. There was briefly water outages as well, but the city was prepared for such attacks, and they had rendered their power and water supply systems autonomous, which the mayor said, for example, saved the city's hospital, for example, for being gravely hit by such strikes. Interestingly, there was also a strike in Zakarpattia, that's in the Carpathian Mountains, the first attack of the kind. It hit communal infrastructure, and altogether in western and central Ukraine last night, it's 6 railway stations which have been impacted. So we see that Russian forces are targeted that kind of infrastructure now.
How about the situation in the rest of the country? Where is the fighting most intense right now?
Well, it's most intense as from the beginning of the conflict in the eastern part of the country, with British intelligence warning that there's a number of Russian battalions which have regrouped in the northeastern part near the city of Kramatorsk. You might remember this city where a missile had hit a train station, killing 59 civilians, and they are also regrouping near Severodonetsk. So we are expecting more strikes, more artillery fights in that region, with also last night the Azovstal steel plant continuously being shelled, and Russia saying it has begun storming within the steel plant, which is the last bastion of Ukrainian resistance in the city of Mariupol.
All right, Emmanuelle, thanks for that update. DW's Emmanuelle Chaze speaking to us from Lviv. Earlier, I asked our correspondent Fanny Facsar in Kyiv what these strikes in the west might signal.
Well, basically, Russia wants to advance. You just described it. They shifted their focus after this unsuccessful assault in Kyiv on February 24th. They shifted it now, third month into this war, more and more towards the Donbas region, but also to the southern part of Ukraine. However, these are not the only parts of Ukraine that experience this heavy shelling, as we heard and seen in that report, also in Lviv. Actually, a part of Ukraine, western Ukraine, that so far was relatively spared from attacks, is also coming under more intensified attack lately, with the most recent reported by the Lviv mayor there of water and electricity infrastructure being hit. However, if you look at the Donbas region, especially when you listen to the governors there of the Luhansk and the Donetsk region, basically there's hardly any place left there where civilians can be safe or feel safe. And in fact, the governor of Luhansk pointed out it's not just becoming really impossible to evacuate people from the Luhansk region, for example, but also just to remove dead bodies from the streets. So you can imagine, of course, that the situation there is very, very desperate for people. But not only there, obviously the focus has been also during the past weeks on Mariupol, both the steel plant there where people remain trapped, but also in the city itself, about 100,000 people who are still in that city that's heavily damaged with the third month into this war.
Well, Fanny, on the steel plant, we hear that Russian forces have launched renewed assault on that plant, despite the fact that President Putin just a few weeks ago had previously ordered the military to hold back from bombarding the plant. Does it appear that they're stepping up pressure now on the soldiers trapped there in the Azovstal?
Russia is basically saying that that brief ceasefire under which that one group of people, about 100 of them, could be evacuated, that temporary ceasefire there was basically used, or rather misused. This is the Russian claim by the Azov regiment, but others holding off there in that steel plant to try to regroup and try to fend off that Russian aggression. So basically Russia is having or painting that narrative of trying to just defend and denazify, they say, this place, because after all, and this has to be added here too, the Azov regiment is a very controversial unit that is trying to defend not only the steel plant, but that actually played a key role in trying to defend Mariupol from Russian occupation. A group that's being accused of sharing a very radical ultra-nationalist views. So this is basically a group that was then used also as a pretext for Russia to invade Ukraine, under this pretext to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. So yes, shelling continues in Mariupol, and the people underground in this steel plant have to bear the brunt, desperate to get out. But will they? Nobody knows.
Well, now for more, I'm joined by Frank Ledwidge. He's a senior lecturer in strategy and law at the University of Portsmouth and a former military intelligence officer. Hi, Frank. It's nice to see you again. The city of Lviv and train stations in the west and central parts of Ukraine have taken fresh hits. How does that feed into Russia's strategy right now?
It's a fairly typical approach of an air campaign traditionally, if you're not concerned about the civilian or war crimes aspect, to try and attack the morale and will to fight of a population. You do that by denying them electricity, transport, water and so forth. And that seems to be what the Russians are doing. Military analysts, however, are slightly confused as to why they're using their precision weapons on that kind of assault rather than the more likely effective attacks on lines of communication, through which, of course, NATO is now pouring weapons, ammunition, and other supplies to the Ukrainians. But the answer to your question is it's of a part of Russian operational approach. You attack a civilian population, try and establish control, and try and lower their morale and will to fight.
Right, but the main fighting and troop movements are in eastern and southern parts of the country, as we know. How much success are they having there?
Very interesting, Rebecca. The answer is towards the Donbass. The last couple of days have shown very, very few attacks. In fact, almost no ground attacks. What we've had instead is a preparation of the ground by artillery, and that seems to be quite considerable. Ukrainian authorities are also reporting moving in of considerable Russian forces, such as that remain, into that area. So it seems they've slightly changed their approach. Last week, they were feeding forces in piecemeal. This week, they're massing for an attack, which I think will take place towards the end of the week, prepared for by artillery. We'll see what happens. They have made some gains down there in the Donbass area, but not as much, I think, as they've wanted. Interestingly, on Sunday, a considerable number of senior officers were killed and injured by a Ukrainian strike, and the Russian Chief of General Staff was involved in that attack, although I think escaped. More or equally interesting, though, Ukrainians are making considerable progress in the northeast. They've taken a lot of ground off the Russians east of Kyiv. That doesn't have a direct impact on the campaign down in Donbass, but the Russians will be looking at it with concern.
Why do you think there's that change of strategy there? Do you think that's an indication that the former strategy wasn't working, or? Yes, it seems to. That would make sense. It's also probably not coincidental that Gerasimov was there over the weekend. Very senior officers, of course, do visit the front occasionally to give out medals and so forth. I would suspect in this case it wasn't to give out medals, it was to give out reprimands and reorganise the operation, sort of kick it into shape. That's of course speculation, but certainly we've seen a slight change in approach with the massing of forces now, which is of course what they should have done militarily about 3 weeks ago and waited, but they didn't do that. Interesting. We're also seeing in neighbouring Belarus sudden large drills that have started to test the army's combat readiness. What is your read into those drills? Lukashenko will be well advised to keep his army on his own territory, since he's rather more to fear from his own population, I think, than Putin has. One would, without having too, and this is fairly recent reports, and without having too much access to analysis, I would suspect this is a diversion. It'd be a very poor idea for the rather even more ramshackle forces of Belarus to try to take on any Ukrainian units. I suspect this is saber-rattling and diversionary activity. May have something to do with the 9th of May, which most analysts are now looking at as an inflection point. We can't tell what they're planning. A very poor idea for them to get involved militarily. They're not capable. All right, Frank, thanks very much for that analysis. Former military intelligence officer Frank Ledwidge. Thank you, Rebecca.